Have you ever stopped to think why some people seem to glide through life while you feel like you're always battling an invisible current? That feeling like everyone around you has cracked a secret code that no one shared with you, as if there is a user manual for existence that you never received. You wake up in the morning and already feel that weight on your chest, that silent question pounding in your head. Who am I really? And the answer never comes with clarity. You look in the mirror and see someone you should know perfectly, but there's always this strange distance, like you're observing a stranger. Maybe you've tried to find answers in 1,000 different places. You've read self-help books that promise transformation in 30 days. You've watched motivational talks that pumped you up for a few hours until reality came crashing back in. You've taken personality quizzes that put you in neat little boxes with pretty labels, but deep down, they didn't touch that profound truth you're searching for. Because what you're looking for isn't on the surface. It's not in the ready-made answers, the magic formulas, the 5 steps to happiness. What you're looking for is hidden in layers of your psyche so deep, even you don't have conscious access to it. It's in the patterns you repeat without realizing, the choices you make without understanding why, the automatic reactions that surface before you can even think. And the scariest part is realizing you've been living on autopilot, guided by unseen forces shaping your life without you knowing where they come from. Today, through a seemingly simple choice, you're going to dive into these depths and finally begin to understand who you truly are. There is a kind of knowledge that can't be reached through reason. Sigmund Freud dedicated his life to unraveling this mysterious territory of the human mind. This region he called the unconscious, where truths about ourselves reside that our conscious ego simply can't or won't see. And it's precisely there that the key lies to understanding why you act the way you do, why you feel what you feel, why you choose what you choose. Right now you stand before 4 fundamental elements of nature: water, fire, earth, and air. Each of these elements carries not just a physical energy, but also an ancient psychic force that resonates with deep aspects of your personality. We're not talking about superficial symbolism or arbitrary associations. We're talking about archetypal connections that exist in the most primitive layers of human consciousness. Mental structures formed long before you developed the capacity for rational thought. So, before we go any further, take a deep breath. Look at these 4 elements. Don't try to analyze which one is more interesting, more powerful, or more suitable. Don't let your superego interfere with judgments about what would be the right choice. Simply observe which element exerts a magnetic, inexplicable, visceral pull on you. This attraction doesn't come from your conscious mind. It comes from a much deeper place, from regions of the psyche where your id resides, where your most primal desires and fundamental anxieties hide. Make your choice now and prepare to discover truths about yourself that perhaps you've never had the courage to face. If you chose water, you're connected to one of the most complex and contradictory psychic forces of the human unconscious. Water represents the emotional world in its purest, most uncontrollable state, that inner ocean of feelings you carry within you, which often threatens to overflow and flood everything around you. Freud would describe your psychic structure as dominated by an intense and conflicted relationship between the id and the ego, where primitive emotional impulses are constantly pressing to manifest, while your conscious mind desperately fights to keep them in check. You are someone who feels everything amplified. When you love with an intensity that's startling. When you suffer as if the world is collapsing. This emotional depth is both your greatest gift and your greatest curse. On one hand, it allows you to connect with people on levels most people can't even imagine exist. You can perceive subtle emotional nuances, grasp what's unsaid, feel another's pain as if it were your own. This radical empathy makes you someone people naturally turn to when they need to be understood, when they need someone who truly sees them. But this same sensitivity also makes you incredibly vulnerable. You absorb the emotions around you, like a sponge soaks up water, and often you can't distinguish what's yours from what belongs to others. This creates a destructive pattern where you lose yourself in relationships, where your psychic boundaries dissolve, and you merge with the other person in an unhealthy way. Freud would call this a fixation at the oral stage of development, where the need for fusion and the anxiety of separation still dominate your relational dynamics. You have a deep ancestral fear of abandonment, a primal terror of being alone that likely originated from very early childhood experiences. Perhaps you felt the love you received was inconsistent, that care came and went like the tides, leaving you in a constant state of alert, never knowing if you could rely on that person being there when you needed them. This pattern has repeated throughout your life in ways you don't always recognize. You choose emotionally unavailable people and then wear yourself out trying to make them love you the way you need. You create emotional tests to see if the person really cares, push people away to see if they'll come back, provoke crises to confirm you're important enough for someone to fight for you. And each time these unconscious strategies fail, each time the person leaves or doesn't pass the test, you feel your greatest prophecy fulfilled. You're not worthy of love. You'll end up alone. You're too much or too little to be loved. But here's the truth. Your unconscious is hiding from you. The problem isn't that you're too much or too little. The problem is that you're trying to heal old wounds through present relationships, trying to make people in the now fill voids that were created long ago. This will never work. No amount of external reassurance will fill that internal void. No person will be able to give you the security you can't give yourself. Your psychic work, if you chose water, is to develop what Freud would call a more mature relationship between your ID and your ego. You need to learn to feel your emotions deeply without drowning in them. You need to recognize that you can be an intensely emotional person and still maintain your individuality, your boundaries, your sense of self. You need to stop seeking wholeness through another and start recognizing that you are already whole, that your emotional depth isn't a flaw to be corrected, but a characteristic to be integrated more healthily into your life. Think about it. How many times have you sacrificed your own needs to keep the peace in a relationship? How many times have you swallowed your truth to avoid rocking the boat? Your tendency is to adapt, to mold, to transform into what you think the other person needs, because unconsciously you believe that being yourself, with all your emotional intensity, would be too much for someone to handle. But every time you do this, every time you betray yourself to keep someone close, you reinforce the belief that who you really are isn't enough. And the cycle continues. If you chose fire, you're connected to a radically different psychic force, a drive that Freud would call the life instinct, or eros, but in its most intense and potentially destructive manifestation. Fire represents vital energy in its purest state, that creative and transformative force that burns within you and demands expression, demands movement, demands that you leave your mark on the world. You are someone who wasn't born to live a small, quiet life. There's a visceral need within you to be seen, to be recognized, to matter. And this need isn't superficial vanity, as many people would try to label it. It's something much deeper and far more complex. In the Freudian structure of your psyche, what dominates is an inflated ego constantly trying to prove something, not to others, but to an extremely critical and demanding superego that is never satisfied. You likely grew up in an environment where love was conditional, where you had to earn approval through achievement, where being good wasn't enough, you had to be the best. Perhaps you were the child prodigy, the one who always had to carry the family's expectations. Or perhaps you were the invisible child who discovered the only way to get attention was through spectacular accomplishments. Either way, you've internalized the belief that your worth as a person is directly tied to what you can achieve, the impact you can make, the recognition you can garner. This has created a compulsive pattern where you're always running, always chasing the next goal, the next achievement, the next validation. And here's the problem. No matter how much you achieve, it's never enough. You reach a goal, and instead of feeling satisfaction, you immediately turn to the next. You receive praise and recognition, but it slips through you like water, never truly penetrating, never truly filling that void you're trying to fill. Because what you're truly seeking isn't external success. What you're seeking is permission to finally rest, to finally feel that you are enough exactly as you are without needing to prove anything. But this permission never comes because you've internalized critical voices that are constantly telling you you need to do more, be more, achieve more. Freud would say you're living under the tyranny of a sadistic superego, a psychic instance that acts like a relentless internal judge, always finding fault, always raising the bar, always saying you're not good enough. And you respond to this critical superego in the only way you've learned, by working harder, pushing yourself more, burning yourself out more. You likely have a complicated relationship with vulnerability. Showing weakness, admitting you don't know something, asking for help, all of these feel like unbearable threats to your carefully constructed self-image of someone strong, competent, in control. So you isolate yourself. You carry your burdens alone. You build walls around your emotional needs and pretend you don't need anyone. And the people around you may admire you, may envy you, but they rarely get to truly connect with you because you don't allow them to see the vulnerable human being behind all those achievements. Your greatest lesson, if you chose fire, is to learn that you don't need to burn to shine. You don't need to consume yourself to be seen. You don't need to earn anyone's love because true love isn't something you earn through heroic feats. It's something you receive simply for existing, for being who you are in your imperfect, vulnerable humanity. The challenge for you is to begin developing what could be called self-compassion, the ability to treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you likely offer so freely to others. You need to learn to listen to the voice of your ID, that part of you that has simple human needs, that wants to rest, that wants to play, that wants genuine connection without agendas or performances. And you need to start questioning that tyrannical superego that's been running your life, asking if the rules it imposes actually serve you, or if they're just keeping you trapped in an endless hamster wheel of effort and exhaustion. Think about it. When was the last time you did something simply because it brought you joy, with no other agenda, without turning it into another accomplishment to be ticked off? When was the last time you allowed yourself to be imperfect, to make a mistake, to not know something, without mentally punishing yourself for it? Your journey isn't about diminishing your fire, but about learning to channel that vital energy in a way that doesn't destroy you in the process. If you chose Earth, you're connected to a psychic structure fundamentally different from the previous two, one that Freud would associate with the anal stage of development and with characteristics involving control, order, stability, and a deep need for predictability. Earth represents the material world, the tangible, the concrete, that which can be touched, measured, controlled. And for you, this need for control isn't just a preference. It's a survival strategy developed very early in life to cope with deep anxieties about chaos and vulnerability. You likely grew up in an environment where things were unpredictable, where you couldn't rely on the structures around you to remain stable. Perhaps your caregivers were inconsistent, sometimes present and sometimes absent, sometimes loving and sometimes cold. Maybe there was financial instability, frequent moves, unexpected losses, or perhaps more subtly, you grew up in an environment where emotions were treated as dangerous, where vulnerability was seen as weakness, where you learned that the only way to stay safe was through rigid control over yourself and your surroundings. Then you developed what Freud might call reaction formations. In other words, you turned anxiety about chaos into a compulsive need for order. You turned fear of vulnerability into an appearance of unshakable strength. You turned unmet emotional needs into radical self-sufficiency. And these defenses worked for a while. They kept you functional, allowed you to navigate a world that felt threatening. But now, these same defenses that once protected you are trapping you. Your need for control makes it difficult for you to surrender, to trust, to allow things to flow organically. You plan everything meticulously. You anticipate every possible problem. You always have a plan B and a plan C. And when things don't go exactly as you planned, when unexpected variables appear, when the inevitable chaos of life manifests, you feel a disproportionate anxiety, a sense that everything is falling apart. You have a difficult relationship with your own emotions, especially with emotions you perceive as weakness, like sadness, fear, need. You've likely developed what Freud would call intellectualization, a defense mechanism where you process emotional experiences through reason and logic, maintaining a safe distance from the actual feelings. You can perfectly analyze why you feel a certain way. You can describe the patterns and causes in detail, but you rarely allow yourself to truly feel those emotions fully and viscerally. This emotional disconnect profoundly affects your relationships. People might feel you're always on guard, always maintaining a certain distance, always controlling how much of yourself you let them see. You're afraid of being seen in your total vulnerability because some part of you believes that if people truly knew you, if they saw your flaws and your weaknesses, they would leave. So you present yourself as someone who has it all together, someone who doesn't need anyone, someone strong and capable. And paradoxically, this performative strength ends up creating the very distance you fear, because people can't connect with a facade, they can only connect with another real, imperfect, vulnerable human being. Your big lesson, if you chose Earth, is to learn that control is an illusion. You can plan and organize and anticipate all you want, but life will always surprise you, always bring the unexpected, always challenge you to adapt. And the more you fight against this fundamental truth, the more you try to control everything, the more suffering you create for yourself. The path for you isn't to completely abandon your structures and your planning, because those traits have value too, but rather to learn to be flexible, to allow yourself to not know, to tolerate uncertainty without collapsing. You need to start recognizing that your emotions aren't enemies to be controlled, but messengers bringing important information about your needs and your boundaries. You need to let your ID have a voice, allow that spontaneous, vulnerable, needy part of you to emerge without judgment, and you need to question the rigid superego that insists vulnerability is weakness, that needing someone is pathological dependency, that showing emotions is losing control. Think about it. How much of your vital energy do you spend trying to keep everything under control? How much do you exhaust yourself trying to predict every possible problem, avoid every potential mistake, present a perfect image to the world? And most importantly, what are you really trying to control? It's not the external world. The external world will never be completely within your control. What you're trying to control are your own internal anxieties, your own primal fears of abandonment and rejection and inadequacy. If you chose air, you're connected perhaps to the most complex and paradoxical psychic structure of all. Air represents the world of ideas, of communication, of freedom, of constant movement, and the impossibility of being captured or defined. And for you, this need for freedom isn't just an aesthetic preference. It's a deeply rooted psychic defense against the terror of true intimacy and real commitment. Freud would likely identify in you what he'd call a phallic fixation, where there's a constant need to prove potency through seduction, through conquest, through the fascination you exert over others, but without ever truly surrendering completely. You are someone incredibly intelligent, articulate, fascinating. You know exactly what to say to capture someone's attention, how to make yourself interesting, how to create a connection that feels deep and meaningful. People are naturally drawn to you, to your energy, to your unique perspective on the world, to the sense of adventure and possibility you carry. But if we look closer, if we observe the pattern that repeats in your relationships, we'll see something revealing. You are a master at creating superficial intimacy while avoiding true intimacy. You share fascinating ideas, stimulating conversations, exciting experiences, but you rarely allow anyone to truly see you, to truly know you in your more vulnerable, less glamorous layers. You likely have a history of relationships that start intensely and end abruptly. You fall in love with the idea of the person, with the promise of what could be, with the potential of the connection. And as long as things remain in the realm of fantasy and possibility, you are completely invested. But the moment things start to become real, the moment the other person begins to have expectations, to need you in concrete and consistent ways, to reveal their own human flaws and needs, you feel an overwhelming urge to flee. Suddenly you notice all the person's flaws. Suddenly the relationship feels suffocating. Suddenly you need space, you need freedom. You need to find yourself again, and you're gone, usually in a way that leaves the other person confused and hurt, wondering what happened, what changed. But what truly happened is you bumped up against your biggest fear. The fear of being truly known and found wanting, the fear of getting locked into something that exposes your limitations, the fear of compromising your carefully constructed identity as someone free, independent, and uncatchable. Freud would say you're operating under what he called primary narcissism, where libidinal investment is primarily directed inward, towards maintaining a grandiose and idealized self-image, and where relationships serve more as mirrors to reflect this greatness than as genuine connections with other human beings in their complex humanity. You probably rationalize this pattern in a sophisticated way. You talk about not believing in monogamy, about valuing diverse experiences, about not wanting to be boxed in by outdated social conventions. And there might be truth to that. But if you're honest with yourself, if you look beyond the intellectual rationalizations, you'll recognize that something deeper is at play. There's a primal fear of dependency, of vulnerability, of genuinely needing another person. Because needing someone means giving that person power over you. It means risking rejection, abandonment, disappointment. And some part of you, likely formed in very early childhood experiences, decided that this vulnerability is unbearable, that it's safer to remain detached, always with one foot out the door, always ready to fly. But here's the cruel irony. In avoiding the vulnerability of true intimacy, you condemn yourself to a profound, existential loneliness. You can be surrounded by people, you can have fascinating and stimulating connections, but on some fundamental level, you are always alone, always unseen, always holding your truest parts away from the eyes of others. And that loneliness eventually becomes unbearable, no matter how many adventures or experiences or achievements you accumulate. Your big lesson, if you chose the air, is learning that true freedom isn't the absence of commitment, but the capacity to consciously choose where and how you commit. It's learning that real intimacy isn't a prison, but an expansion of the self, an opportunity to be known and loved, not in spite of your flaws, but including them. It's learning that vulnerability isn't weakness, but courage. The courage to show up whole, to risk being rejected, to trust that you are worthy of love even when you're not performing your most dazzling, fascinating version. You need to start questioning the defense mechanisms that have governed your relational life, especially the intellectualization and rationalization that turn deep emotional fears into sophisticated philosophical arguments about freedom and authenticity. You need to ask yourself, am I truly choosing this freedom, or am I running from the possibility of being truly loved? Am I truly honoring my authenticity, or am I hiding behind a carefully constructed persona? And most importantly, am I willing to trade the thrill of constant novelty for the depth of true intimacy? Now that you've explored the psychoanalytic meaning of your choice, it's important to understand that None of these psychic structures are superior or inferior to the others. Each represents a particular way of organizing internal experience, of dealing with fundamental anxieties about existence, connection, and identity, and each carries within it both extraordinary potentials and specific challenges that need to be worked through. What Freud taught us, and what remains true today, is that self-awareness is the essential first step for any real transformation. You cannot change patterns you don't recognize. You cannot integrate parts of yourself you continue to deny. And you certainly cannot heal wounds you keep pretending don't exist. The choice you made today, as simple as it may seem on the surface, revealed something profound about how your unconscious operates, about what defenses you've developed, about what primal fears govern your decisions even when you think you're choosing freely. And this revelation is just the beginning of a much longer, much deeper journey of self-discovery. Freud described the human psyche as a battlefield where three forces are constantly in conflict: the id, with its primal desires and irrational impulses, the superego, with its rigid rules and moral judgments, and the ego, trying to mediate between these opposing forces while also dealing with the demands of external reality. And psychic health, according to him, comes not from eliminating any of these forces, but from achieving a harmonious integration between them, where each has its appropriate place, where none completely dominates at the expense of the others. If you chose water, your journey involves learning to give shape to your internal oceans without repressing your emotional depth. If you chose fire, your journey involves learning to direct your vital energy without burning yourself out in the process. If you chose earth, your journey involves learning to be flexible in your structures without completely losing your solid foundation. And if you chose air, your journey involves learning to land and commit without losing your essence of freedom. But regardless of your choice, the invitation is the same. Start paying attention to the patterns that repeat in your life. Observe the situations that trigger the same emotional reactions. Notice the relationships that follow the same destructive scripts. Recognize the moments when you act on autopilot, guided by forces you don't fully understand. And instead of judging these patterns, instead of criticizing yourself for them, start asking yourself with genuine curiosity, what is this pattern trying to protect me from feeling? What old wound is it trying to keep from being touched? What unmet need is it trying to satisfy in an inadequate way? Remember the pain you brought to the beginning of this journey, that feeling of being lost, of not understanding yourself, of repeating the same mistakes without knowing why. Now you have a flashlight to begin illuminating these internal shadows. Now you have a map, albeit an initial one, to start navigating these deep territories of the psyche. And most importantly, now you know that what you seek is not outside of you, in the answers of other people, in magic formulas, in quick fixes. What you seek is within, waiting to be discovered, integrated, transformed. Before we go, I'd really love to know, which element did you choose? Let me know in the comments if it was water, fire, earth, or air, and tell me if the analysis resonated with something you recognize in yourself, and if this video has helped you in any way, if it's offered you valuable insights, or made you reflect on aspects of yourself you hadn't considered before. Please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of deep self-discovery with us. Remember, knowing yourself isn't a destination to arrive at, but a path to walk. And every step on this path, every revelation about your own shadows, every moment of brutal honesty with yourself brings you a little closer to an authentic life, genuine relationships, an inner peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. The unconscious mind can seem daunting when you start exploring it, but it's also where your greatest potential for transformation resides. It's where not only your wounds are stored, but also your gifts, not only your fears, but also your deepest courage. And by illuminating these shadows with the light of consciousness, You not only understand yourself better, you free yourself to finally live the life that's always been waiting for you, a life where you're no longer bound by past patterns, but free to forge new paths in the present.